now there calls for a state of emergency to be declared in South Africa following the violence that we've seen and looting. Hardly hours after President Cyril Ramaphosa appealed for calm and announced the deployment of the SANDF last night, mobs of people were already back on the streets vandalizing businesses. Well, we're joined now by Jasmine Opperman, the security analyst, and Chris Maroleng, Executive Director at Good Governance Africa. Good evening to you both, and thank you very much indeed. Chris Maroleng, if I may just start with you. In our history, certainly for people my age and older, the phrase state of emergency has a particular ring. In fact, there'll be members of our government, members of our cabinet, people who work in the upper echelons of government and our military and police who would have been arrested under that legislation. I do wonder if that makes it much harder for our government to consider this option.
It does, I think, and good afternoon to you, Stephen. The historical components and the memories and images that the concept of a state of emergency brings into mind is certainly daunting, not just for people who were detained and had their freedoms suspended as a result of the imposition of such an extraordinary measure. However, having said so, I think that the situation on the ground, from the pictures that we've been seeing on Newzroom Afrika and many other channels, indicate to us that there is a need for an intensified presence by the state security infrastructure in the face of this riotous behavior. However, Stephen, I would not at this stage say that we are at the stage where we require a state of emergency. I think when we look at the concentration of this riotous behavior, the looting that has happened, it's really been limited to principally two provinces currently, which is basically KwaZulu-Natal and, of course, Gauteng province. So the imposition of a state emergency that would see large tracts of our country being effectively locked down and placed under severe restrictions at this stage is not necessary. I think what is required at this stage is a much more nuanced approach to policing of the situation, ensuring that security is restored to specific locations. And we can see by the movements of some of the rioters and the protesters that this has been limited predominantly to areas that have large concentrations of business and economic activity. And certainly, if we can see the enhanced presence of our state security apparatus in those locations, which are becoming quite apparent, especially in malls and infrastructure like that, I think we could do a lot to stabilizing the situation and ensuring that we have a more nuanced approach to policing the situation.
Jasmine, the state of emergency effectively suspends certain rights. It suspends certain parts of the Constitution only on a temporary basis, and that's important to remember. I mean, one of the things that would make easier, for example, is to institute a curfew. But Jasmine, I mean, we have a curfew anyway because of the state of national disaster. So this really raises the question, would a state of emergency actually make much difference?
No, and I want to agree that now declaring a state of emergency, I cannot see, and I think what the only thing it can do is to accelerate frustration, emotion, and calls to populism by specific political leaders due to the historical connotations. So I do agree, but the state of emergency is not the answer. The problem we are facing with in South Africa is that we are sitting with a government, and although, as indicated, concentrated, clearly is not in control. So if we want to talk about a state of emergency, maybe we must look at our governance and our governance security structures needing a state of emergency in directing them and addressing them and the shortcomings that is so blatantly obvious. If one looks at, for instance, when the whole violence started, it was KwaZulu-Natal, it was directed. Everyone said it's linked to Zuma. It has now clearly escalated into criminality, clearly escalated way beyond the Zuma issue. And I'm afraid where you had the police relying on private security companies to provide them with ammunition to protect their police stations, we are seeing actually a civil society standing up and filling the gap of governance, and that has serious implications.
Well, this worries me. I mean, Chris Maroleng, I'm sure it worries you. It's one thing for people to want to defend their communities, very difficult to argue with someone who is trying to protect their family and their property. I mean, you can't go to that person and say what you're doing is irrational. It's entirely rational. The problem is some of these people are armed.
Yes, some of these people are armed, and certainly it talks to the breakdown of the system of governance that Jasmine refers to here. And at a systemic level, Stephen, we at Good Governance Africa talk about governance really as that process that determines who gets what, when, and how, the authoritative allocation of resources. And what we're seeing in South Africa is that there's severe contestation about how these resources are indeed authoritatively allocated in our country. Further to that, we've seen questions that delegitimize the current governance, that is the state in South Africa, because of the malfeasance that we have seen, because of the rampant corruption that we have witnessed within the governing structures of South Africa, that delegitimizes the government from actually taking drastic measures to secure the situation. And certainly, Stephen, when you look at the people on the ground, many communities are now turning to self-help. That is, the communities themselves securing areas, securing their own homes, securing their businesses. And this leads us to question the confidence that the people have. And certainly the police have not covered themselves in glory in the manner in which they've initially responded to the incidences of the rioting and the looting that has broken out in certain parts of South Africa. So we're looking at a question that really says to us, Stephen, as South African society, we really need to ask tough questions about the effectiveness of not just the state, but institutions of the state that are supposed to safeguard and protect the people of this country.
Jasmine, I mean, in a worst-case scenario, and I really do mean worst-case scenario, we are nowhere near there yet. You only have, what the last figure I have is around 190,000 police officers. You have, I think, 71,000 South African National Defence Force members. The point that I'm making is that we're a country of nearly 60 million people. It cannot be governed by force. In a way, that's the point. It's got to be governed by consent. Where I'm going with this, Jasmine, is that this is about politics, this is about consent, and the word that I think we're going to use again and again over the next few weeks, it's about the legitimacy of government.
I do agree, Stephen, and I think if one looks at the military only, and if you really want to break down, we are looking at most 8,000 soldiers that can be used at this point in time for domestic deployment. But you're sitting with a problem, severe budget constraints, training programs being cancelled. And within that, we are still looking at the military now with a Hail Mary solution. There is no Hail Mary solution to this problem. The problem that we are faced with is that, and what we don't want to see now, is a leadership falling back to populism, falling back to revolutionary talk. We do not need that. We need strong leadership. We need leadership that is sane, that will bring calm. But I'm afraid, as indicated just now, that the trust between communities and the state and the government has been slowly eroding over several years. Everyone is talking about visible policing. When the community see police, they don't see policing. They see crime. They see collusion. They see cooperation. And hence that whole concept has actually become irrelevant. So what we do need now is actually a movement from civil society. And I think that is the message of hope we have in South Africa, is a message from civil society that such behavior cannot and will not be accepted. And we have to see the positive in that, because I'm afraid if we're looking for positives in the leadership currently, there is simply no one or none that can embolden such trust. So when we have movements like the Black Lives Matter, and within civil society, the South African civil society has to stand up, has to counter simplistic calls that it's an ethnic issue, that it's a white-black issue. We cannot afford simplistic statements by politicians to maintain and claim and hold on at all costs to what they have. It is time for South Africans to say, enough is enough. We need to take our societal hierarchy. It is going to take time. We need to address this problem and move forward. The question is, will the leaders currently in position with all their favors and all their hands in a pot of money be willing to make certain sacrifices? And that is where the problem lies, Stephen. And hence I'm going back. You talk about the state of emergency in South Africa. No, we need a state of emergency within government, revisiting, relooking at themselves, honesty and ethical considerations that will take the South Africans that is clearly not in favor of what is happening forward. How many people have lost their work over the last 48 hours? How many people are left stranded? We do not see those numbers. We are just seeing the burning. But there's devastating consequences for our economy. There's devastating consequences for how we view South Africa. And yet, within this chaos, we can bring order if we start listening to civil society instead of looking for a political leader that will save us overnight.
Jasmine Opperman, the security analyst, Chris Maroleng, Executive Director at Good Governance Africa. Thank you both. Well,